that dun, 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 and I hear Def Leppard.
Oh yeah,
That's is that bad that I hear those two things simultaneously?
Sheffield rocks.
Think of shops in London selling Union Jack flags. But it's a beautiful day for the king with a wildly inappropriate flag, which still has the Irish flag on it and does not have the Welsh flag on it. It's just so sad. And
It's,
I once thought we
it's
would
because
have
the Welsh language is so gobbledygook and nonsense.
It's because Wales isn't a kingdom; it's a principality. So
There's principalities involved, Wales.
They gave it to the prince.
apparently, the title of prince in Wales was adopted instead of king because everybody was calling himself a king, and so some guy was like, "Well, let's use this Roman term, princeps, which is the basis of prince." So then we ended up with the Prince of Wales, who was superior to all the kings of Wales. How about that? This is history.
Wales.
Fascinating.
You're effing it up for everybody. Let's go.
Oh, sorry. We'll hit.
Good morning to most, good afternoon to others, and good evening to our viewing audience across the pond. Many of you were probably watching the coronation this morning. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Now, if you are new to the channel, new to this show, like what you're seeing, please hit like, hit subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell as we are constantly adding new shows with other channels and cross streams. And we're just adding new shows here on TIR. Recently, we did another episode of Pop Life where my good friend, noise rock legend, as I forget which publication called Conan a noise rock legend. It was a major one, I can't remember. Anyway, noise rock legend and I, Conan Neutron, discussed the beginnings and the tragic endings of grunge music. And I say grunge in inverted quotes every time I say it because we both do not feel that grunge is a genre as much as it is a style. But it was a good time to be had as Conan actually plays with and records with some figures that were very instrumental in the beginnings of that scene. Now on to something a bit more serious. My co-host and partner in this TIR endeavor, Pascal Robert, is more than the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He's our friend, our brother, and a valued member of many communities. Many of us struggle to maintain our health and well-being, and this is a particularly tough time for Pascal, who will be off air as he focuses on recovery. Recovery is a delicate time, and we just want our brother to get better. To give him the best chance of success, we will be vigilant in moderation for our chat and comments and ruthless banning any abusive speech. The TIR fan community has always been brilliant, supportive, and wickedly funny. It seems greedy to ask for more, but that's what I'm doing for our sake and especially for Pascal's. Please, fam, you gotta be kind. now, with all that out of the way, let's bring in the Saturday crew. The faceless voice of reason that puts so many of these fun shows together. Did a great job with the Thursday Star Wars show. M. Toussaint.
Hello. Star Wars show was fun. I caught some of it. Chris Catrone was in the Catrone zone.
He was in the Catrone zone, but not Crazy Town.
Not Crazy Town.
We did not get him to crazy. I think I felt very confident that I kept him out of Crazy Town. We didn't get Trump is right and Republicans didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And, you know. Speaking of Republicans, everybody's favorite Curd's the word, is back.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the UK at a conference, speaking at a conference because he's a distinguished scholar. He's also a distinguished gentleman. He had his entire family up watching the coronation at 7 a.m. Central Time. Please welcome me, Gene Bajlan.
Greetings. Good to see you, Jason. And NT, I hope you're feeling well this fine Saturday morning, because it is, of course, the coronation. And Great Britain has its crowned king, King Charles III. May he live forever. And, yeah.
Isn't he kind of on his way out? They put the crown on him. He was like, what?
he is getting into Biden territory. So
there's a pretty bird over there, isn't it?
I see. What's going on there, Harry? I had a really wonderful time. I can't really do the Prince Charles accent.
Just falling asleep everywhere.
I was actually watching. They had a really good series in Britain. The guys who do Star Stories. They did one for the coronation with Harry Enfield as Prince Charles, and the woman who's in that new Anne Frank TV show. She plays Fergie's sister. What have I told you about doing this, Jason? He puts me up on the screen,
Yeah.
and I'm just looking at him. I'm just looking at him. Looking at myself, all confused. Scared me. He always does this. I say, please don't put my ugly face up, and he does it.
Well, I had to do something, and I didn't want to take myself off camera.
But you're so handsome. Everybody wants to see you doing something.
They don't want to see me. I was putting headphones in so I can hear you guys better. And
Harry is my true king. I pledge allegiance.
Harry Potter.
To Harry, the true king of England. He should take his self to Canada, raise an army, a diverse army, to come in,
Harry Potter,
and get rid of the monarchy.
Stupid bitch. Harry Potter.
That's how they used to do it in the old days, you know.
Sure.
Instead of doing a Netflix special, he'd raise an army and, teach his brother and father a lesson. Maybe have to do the kids in. Who knows?
Do the kids in.
Well, that's what they'll do. They sever the bloodline, take out
That's
the entire
right.
branch of the.
His brother's kids, he'd get rid of them.
Get rid of them.
Gene, can you see the comments?
No, what's going on in the comments?
We, for those of you that are patrons of the show, as you know, we do an after show champagne room, and this is Saturday, our free shows where we open up the champagne room to the public. And we had MT and I have been doing reaction videos.
Yep.
The people asked for it, but we won't do reaction videos on what people want. We do reaction videos on what we want. And what we want is nonsense. And this up and coming rapper, I believe his name in the TIR community now is MC Uncircumcised.
What?
Dropped the most vicious revenge breakup rap I've ever heard in my life. And his overdubs, as he was saying very sad, they weren't even hurtful, they were just like sad things about his relationship. He kept going, Harry Potter.
Harry Potter.
And I don't know what that means.
Who knows? Maybe it's some code that the youths are
Right.
using these days. Doing a Harry Potter.
Right? The youths.
The youths.
It was so weird.
Well, I've been watching these old men from Newcastle rap. They're pretty funny.
Do they just start yelling out?
They start yelling out stuff. They're like old white man, garage, grime rappers.
I saw that's the clip that you put in the chat.
Yeah, I was like,
The guy who's cross-dressing. His legs are not that bad.
His legs
Someone
were
said
good.
Voldemort is a groom.
Voldemort
is a groom. I mean, the whole of Harry Potter, I like feel vindicated because I always thought Harry Potter was terrible, and I didn't see what all the fuss was about. It seemed like a worse version of the Worst Witch. I don't know if you know what the Worst Witch is.
The Worst Witch? I totally know the Worst Witch.
The Worst Witch was way better, where they're at the girls' school and things like that. I think and it was like they're just doing the Worst Witch, but I hate this like valorization of the British public school system, with houses and things like this, because these places are terrible. They had a series of documentaries about like all these elite public schools where it's like everybody was like molested by the teachers and it was all covered up.
I remember when that happened.
It was extremely disturbing. So you have all these, you have this valorization of this romanticized idea of what British schools are supposed to be, which is based on this very elite conception of education, that you have houses and things like that, and there's all this kind of team spirit, but that kind of stuff is like a complete romanticization of what is kind of a brutal system in which children are very often separated from their families and they have all kinds of issues of maladjustment, and perhaps it explains some of the depravity of the British ruling classes, that they're all grist through this system of public education. But it's all cool because you have Slytherin and the dumb stupid hat, the hat that makes you go in a house, it's all just nonsense.
Harry Potter.
Oh, and I should probably know, somebody in the chat said when we say public school in Britain, we're actually talking about private schools. So we have state schools and public schools, which I assume comes from the notion that it trains the elite for public service. So, but they're like very elite private schools. There's a kind of hierarchy in private schools in Britain. So you have like these very elite schools that are, that you pay hundreds of thousands of pounds. Well, Westminster Grammar, Rugby, Eton, of course, Cheltenham's Ladies College, all these fancy schools. And then there are all like some provincial ones, like the one I went to, Hull Grammar School. And then there's state schools.
I just picture just dirty face.
I was in a house. We had
James
houses at my school. We had Andrew Marvell, William G., William Wilberforce, and Bishop Alcock. And I was in Bishop Alcock, the best house.
Well, of course you were.
Harry Potter.
I'm an Alcocker. An Alcock man. To the days I die.
Not a some cock man.
An Alcock man, exactly.
An all cock.
Bishop Alcock was I believe the founder of the Hull Grammar School in the Middle Ages. And we had several well-known alumni, including the poet William G., Andrew Marvell, and William Wilberforce, the British parliamentarian who was responsible for pushing legislation to end slavery in the British Empire. In fact, there is a historically black college in Ohio named for him. So there's some interesting Hull Grammar School news. And we even have a school song, which is 650 years have rolled away by Humber's swelling tide. High in the ranks of church and state our noble founders ride. There you go.
They beat that into you. They
so
beat
British.
that like Joe Clark. Like Joe Clark and lean on
we
me.
We willingly submitted to our indoctrination.
That's some Joe Clark. Sing the school song when you get caught smoking in the bathroom. Fairy side.
Yeah. So
Gene has been super British lately.
Gene went to school with they used to call me Crazy Joe.
a lot of people I went crazy. Went to school.
Now they call me Batman. Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark.
Yeah, there's well, they've moved my school now. It's now merged with the old girls' school, which was called Tranby. Now it's the
Oh God damn! You went to a school called Alcock and the girls' school.
No. My house was called Alcock.
That doesn't make it better.
It's like Slytherin.
That does not make it better. I've never read a Harry Potter book or seen a movie, and I don't say that with any sort of braggadocio, because the last time I was up to see my kids, we were in San Francisco, and there's like a Harry Potter play, a new play or a new movie, I forget. I want to say it was a play. And we were walking by the American Conservatory Theater, and my daughter's boyfriend saw that there's a new Harry Potter play. And he was going, "Oh, wow, look at this. This new Harry Potter's out." Da, da, da. And my daughter looked over at me and she goes, "My dad didn't let us watch Harry Potter, so I don't know what you're talking about."
Wow.
And then she looks at me and she goes, "See what you did, Dad?"
Damn.
I just know, when you go to King's Cross Station, because I have to catch my train when I go to London, go to see my parents, I have to go to King's Cross Station. They have the Harry Potter, they have like a kind of Harry Potter photo zone, and there's just people just lining up for like maybe like an hour just to get that picture with this like silly, oh look, it's the Harry Potter train. I don't know, because they're supposed to, Harry Potter's platform is at King's Cross, so super annoying that they have all this Harry Potter stuff around there, because I'm just trying to get a train to Hull.
With your dirty face, you and your dirty face, little boy.
He was pretty tired after the journey. We had a good time though. He kept extracting food from me, going like, "I'm hungry," giving me the sad face, like my tummy's empty, And he goes, "I miss my mummy. And when I was in my mummy's tummy, I was hugging her heart." And I was like, "Stop it. I'm not buying you those food."
And that's when you looked at him, you said, "You could have stayed your funky ass at home with your punk ass mama."
Yeah.
I was hugging her heart.
Yeah.
Who says that?
Zal says that. He knows what to say.
Gene got real ghetto on that little boy. All the hole came out of him right there. If I hear you say any word with an M in it, goddammit,
He's quiet right now because
yeah, don't ask for M&M's, Marmite, mayonnaise, marmalade. Don't you?
Maybe. He's dropped a couple of F-bombs, but I'm not going to bring it up with him, because I don't want him to know that the F-bomb is not. It's a tough one. You want him to stop saying the F word, but you don't want him to think it's transgressive to say the F word. So
right.
You have to just ignore him when he says, "These fucking seagulls ate my ice cream." Fanny.
Sounding like a good hole, man.
Yep.
Well, we were in the opticians yesterday, and he just goes, "I want some glasses." I'm like, "You don't need glasses. You're 4 and your eyes are fine." He goes, "I can't fucking see, Dad."
No.
And I hope he had a British accent.
He's very Nathan Robinson with his accent.
Can't fucking publish that.
Dad.
He was like on the train. He would just go like, we were on the underground, the tube, getting to King's Cross because I'm cheap, and went on the Piccadilly line instead of catching the fast train. And then after like the third stop, he was like going, "This is the Piccadilly line service to Heathrow Terminal 1." And he's like, "Is this the Piccadilly line service?" I'm like, yes, it's the Piccadilly line service. "What's a Piccadilly line service?" I'm like, "You tell me." This is my response to him now. If he asks me these questions, I'm like, "You tell me. You clearly have a theory, so share it with the world.
Gene came back home and gave the kid right back to. You want to see your mama, don't you? You better run to her ass now.
He was very pleased to see his mother.
I bet he was. That ain't beats me.
Daddy gives him too much ice cream. That's the mistake.
You're trying to shut him up. You're trying to shut him up, weren't you?
Yeah.
No, you weren't. I know exactly what you did. You know why? Because I do the same thing.
You get him ice cream.
I ask my son, I just say when we go, because we stay in San Francisco, so I ask him which way he wants to go, and generally he wants to go to where the shops are, and he kind of knows now where the toy shops are.
Wise.
And he also just likes to walk around, but he also knows there's this ice cream place that he really digs. And in all fairness, it gives me an opportunity to eat ice cream as well, because he's never going to finish it.
Wise. Well, you have to learn when you have kids that don't buy yourself food.
Yeah.
You're going to be eating off the.
We're scavengers, right, Gene? When you're the dad, you are the scavenger.
You're the scavenger.
That's what you are.
Yeah.
Gene Bajlan wants to share a story.
Here we go. We've got I just wanted to announce that we have a new Jessica Crüe.
This happens far too often in academia. Actually, not just academia. I think it happens anywhere where the race first ideology gets you some points.
Anywhere where the appearance of diversity is
important,
yeah, and that is a minority. That's a minority of places we should probably always remember. But there are certain fields where it matters, and that's reflected on the incentive. It's kind of ironic that people used to try and pass themselves off as white, and now we're having the reverse tendencies. And one has to really wonder, what are the incentives that are driving this? I mean, I don't think it's universal, but it's a very interesting, it's an interesting commentary on where we are at the moment. As a
here, I'll post it right here, and you can read it, Gene. Bam! This is the person. Here, let me get it.
Yeah, so we have an anthropology professor at the University of California, Berkeley, whose identity as a Native American has been questioned for years, apologized this week for falsely identifying as indigenous, saying that she is a white person who lived an identity based on family law. And, Elizabeth Hoover, associate professor in environmental science, policy, and management, said in an apology post on Monday on her website that she claimed an identity of a woman of Mohawk and Mi'kmaq descent, but never confirmed that identity with those communities or researched her ancestry until recently. So, I mean, it's an interesting commentary on, I think, the value of having a identity within, having an identity that you can market within academia, or where you can perhaps position yourself in a way that other people might not position themselves. I would not want to say that this kind of privileging of minority identities is universal in American society in the way that the right often pursues it, but I think there are certain elements of elite society, including academia, where there is this kind of value placed on quote unquote diversity.
Representation matters.
Representation matters, exactly. And I think we should distinguish that from legitimate demands for inclusion.
Oh, someone said Kuba's on the set of Citizen Kane. Cuba, welcome.
Good morning, gentlemen.
We pretty much, I'd pretty much accepted that.
Hello.
Yeah, we hear you. I pretty much accepted that you were you slept in.
Hey,
And I was like, we got raw and uncut Cuba, because if this is early morning, Cuba is vicious.
Well, Cuba, like me, has been celebrating the ascent of his new king.
That's true.
He's part of the Commonwealth.
Cuba's head of state is the same as my head of state.
Never forget.
Never forget.
Not my king. That's the like, not my king.
well, speaking of some place where we could use somebody of mixed Mohawk and Mi'kmaq heritage, right? Like, there's an elite role that I could use some more diversity.
They should make Ashley the Queen of Canada.
Jesus Christ.
I don't know if her French is good enough, frankly.
Oh yeah, you've got to have someone who speaks good French. Monsieur Coubert.
Le grand seigneur de Ottawa, prince de la Colombie-Britannique, right? Chevalier de Kelowna.
That's actually quite funny because Zal calls knights chevalier because that's knights in Persian. And he's like, Daddy, where are my chevalier?
And then he goes, dirty bitch.
And I like the idea that the British part of your ancestry, hearing him say that, it's like, oh no, what has happened, right? We didn't Brexit for this.
We did not.
Someone's calling you Cuba Gooding Jr. That's pretty funny. Nothing is funnier than Gene thinking that big picture at that place we were at for Cuba's wedding.
I thought, well, there was a picture in the house we all stayed in for Cuba's wedding, and it looked like I don't know. It looked like some kind of blonde person. So like they all look kind of similar when they're small. So I assumed it was Cuba and his dad.
Gene goes, I was like, I don't think that's Cuba. And Gene goes, of course it is. Look how sad he looks.
Yeah, look how sad he looks. Look how sad
that is
still,
that and the I do is the highlight of that wedding for me. Because every time I walk by that picture, I just started fucking chuckling. It was so massive.
It was
it's like the size of the wall.
Yes.
And I was like, Gene, you really think that comes with the house? They just blow up a baby picture. The size.
No. Gene believes that I travel with it.
Summer, did you bring the photo? Oh, Jesus. It's funny to laugh at mistakes. I mean, Gene could always bring up me not wanting to go in the house because there was a mouse in there. And I was like, no.
Yeah, it was a cute mouse.
Let him have it.
Given that we were in an actual vineyard, like literally the grapes start growing at the fence, you're gonna like do you assume that we irradiate like our agricultural land, right? That there's not going to be any yes, there's no life, no small animals within a 15-mile radius.
I have
Chernobyl the soil so that people wouldn't have to see a mouse.
I have such horrible PTSD from living in that warehouse.
Oh God, yeah, I can
being
imagine.
overrun by all those rats. Look, if you guys watched the clip we did with the unhoused residents of Wood Street, which was where I lived, we actually kind of joked about all the rats because the rat problem got insane over there, and I really do have I wouldn't even say a fear. It's a violent hatred of rodents.
Even rabbits.
Rabbits are langomorphs. They are not.
Oh, are they langomorphs?
Ooh.
Check. What about guinea pigs?
I would never just see a guinea pig in the wild. Where the hell am I?
Peru.
Peru. Yeah, you're in Peru. And you see guinea pigs, I believe, are domesticated animals anyway. They're like a fruit. They're just cows, but in the Americas, right?
Oh yeah, they're eaten for food, and that's why they were originally domesticated.
Yeah.
But I think you can also find them. I don't know if they're escapees, right? Like I tunneled out, boss. Right?
Yeah,
I'm gonna make it this time.
They seem like animals that
Then-
might escape.
I'm just gonna keep burrowing until I get to Baja, California. Because
Pretty cute.
there's a guy there.
A guy there
for rodents.
who traffics Peruvian guinea pigs looking for a new life in the Americas. It's like we could get eaten in Peru, or we could make it to America and be a pet and die of mange.
Jesus Christ.
When they arrive, they're handed a tiny little passport with like a tiny little social insurance number, right?
And they put them in hamster wheels to like.
Hey,
Power.
please, they're exercise wheels. Hamster wheels, that's a bit of a speciesism you did right there.
Oh, dude. So someone said prairie dogs. So in touring, you see those roadside zoos and they're all over the place in the middle of the country. And this one place we were driving from, I'll never forget this drive. We were driving from Boise, Idaho to Louisiana. And making the drive in the middle of nowhere, I kept seeing these signs that said zoo, next exit, zoo, 20 miles down, 100 miles down, whatever. And so I looked over at my ex at the time. It's just me and her in the group. And I'm like, let's go to this zoo. I said, I want to see what a prairie dog is. And she goes, do you know what a prairie dog is? And I said, isn't it a mix of like a wolf and a coyote?
Yes, that is yes, correct.
And she looked at me and she goes, yep. And she just had this weird face the whole time. And I was just yelling in the car. I was like, all right, 15 miles to the prairie dog. And she goes, uh-huh. And we get there because it said the world's largest prairie dog. And in my mind, I'm thinking of going to this giant zoo, and you're gonna see this large,
see some Ned Stark, monster wolf, bullshit.
I got to this fucking Joe Exotic looking ass fucking ramshackle house, and you get through this weird looking gift shop, and everything is the biggest in the world, right? Come see the largest snake in the world. So when you get in, I'm like, and it was like $12 to get in. So I was like, where's the prairie dogs? And they're like, well, they're in the back. And I'm like, okay. They're like $12. And so it was like, we paid the $12. And she's just sitting back there cracking the fuck up. And there's all these little things just running around, like little squirrel looking things running around. And I'm like, where's the prairie dog? And homegirl's cracking the fuck up. She goes, those are prairie dogs, dude.
You were so disappointed. Poor prairie dogs.
Oh yeah, they're just a bunch of rodents running around. Yeah. And they inbreed cows, so cows can have like legs growing out of their neck. It's the saddest.
It's very depressing.
Oh, it's depressing as fuck, dude.
You were expecting a boss fight, but instead you got a level 1 mob.
Isn't that ever the story?
I was so mad. I started yelling in the middle of the place. I was like, who pays for this?
If you stop off at something on the motorway in America that says it's the biggest of something, that's your fault. I know by now, driving through Missouri, don't stop off. Just keep going until you get to St. Louis.
Gene, do you see this comment on the screen?
This would be a War Punch moment if Jason were a young white guy.
God damn it, I was promised prairie dogs.
I was promised prairie dogs, and all I got are these desert rats.
Well, they're still pretty cute.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I mean, they talk to one another. They can whistle.
Yeah.
It was the saddest thing I've ever seen.
Plus, you can make prairie dogging jokes with homegirl.
Oh boy.
Well, she thought I don't know, I haven't seen her in years, but she had quite a laugh all the way to
all the way to Louisiana.
Yeah, all the way to New Orleans, just fucking telling everybody, this dumbass,
your new hip hop name.
So, tell him what you thought a prairie dog was again, city boy.
There you go.
Well, look, today is a special day for Jean Bajlan and Cuba.
In Cuba.
Also, Stefan Bertram Lee, who is dressed like King Charles at the moment. That's why he couldn't come on.
He's got the wig and everything.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
emotional. He's been
No,
emotional all
it's
morning.
King Charles, Bonnie Prince Charlie, right? The real Stuart pretender.
Jean, tell us about the new head of state. Also,
King
let's
Charles.
talk about his wife, who's been in the tabloids for years, is now the queen.
Queen consort. Queen. There's a difference. Queen consort. She's not
Queen.
She's not queen in her own right.
You called her queen what now?
consort.
Consort.
Yeah.
Let's talk about all these rules to being the king, queen, the Prince of Charles.
Well, obviously, as people are familiar, that in Britain, as well as in some select Commonwealth countries like Cuba's native land of Canada,
Although, just wait for us to fill out the paperwork.
the head of state, the head of state is, of course, the king, the monarchy. And the way the monarchy is conceptualized in Britain, it's a constitutional monarchy. The monarch is part of parliament, as part of this. We have this fusion of powers in Britain. And, the monarch is the head of the state and has a bunch of powers that exist in theory, but are very rarely used. For example, they can revise legislation. They can refuse legislation in theory.
They dissolve parliament, don't they?
They can dissolve parliament, but it's all governed through tradition, a codified tradition. Britain, it's often said that Britain doesn't have a constitution. It does have a constitution. It's just it's spread out over numerous different sources, law books, parliamentary procedure records, etc., etc. So it has this kind of dispersed, unorganized constitutional order, and the monarchy is a kind of central feature of that, with a significant amount of power, but also a theoretical power, but also a lot of economic power, of cultural influence. I mean, even if the monarch can't, in practice stop a law, they get to look at it, they get access to the leadership, etc. So we have this
all the way back to the Roman Empire. They understood that people will listen to the guy on their money.
Mm-hmm. So we have this monarchical order in Britain, and the Queen, who fulfilled that role from the early 1950s to, until she passed away, was kind of relatively popular. Was definitely just something that people accepted was a sign of continuity with an older order. But over her reign, there's been massive changes in Britain, in Canada as well. Of course, I think in 1982 they broke their final constitutional tethers with Britain, with the exception for the monarchy. And so we have this monarchy that has continued, and the Queen passed away, and now it's passing to Charles, who is perhaps a more controversial figure than the Queen was. People who grew up with him, I don't know, who was a kind of celebrity king, who is a wealthy landowner, a businessman, somebody who has very strong opinions about architecture, and is attached to an institution which, although for many on the conservative side of the political spectrum, is a symbol of continuity with the past. Perhaps in Canada is a symbol of what makes Canada distinct from the United States. But for many people, the monarchy is increasingly an institution which seems irrelevant and out of touch, especially as we know more and more about the lives of the kings and things like that. So with the end of Elizabeth, we're entering a kind of new terrain with the monarchy. We'll see how Charles handles it, what kind of changes he's going to make, and how this is going to be handled in different parts of the former British Empire, where Charles is head of state, like Canada. So in Britain, I would say there are certainly people celebrating this. I was there just before the celebration, but there's, in London, I saw, street parties being organized. I saw a lot less of that in the north, because, this big event is taking place right at the moment where people are suffering from serious inflation. There's a massive uptick in industrial action. It's very difficult times. And so there's a kind of controversy around, is this a useful spending of public money? We're dumping serious amounts of cash into the monarchy, not, in the grand scheme of things that much, but it seems a little perverse that you have this huge investment in what is a kind of pageantry from the past at a time of crisis for the country. As for Canada, I'll hand it over to Cuba. I don't know what he has to say about it.
Well, the one important piece of context is that the 50% of Canadians are either immigrants or children of immigrants, and that number has been stable for I think since the 1960s, if not longer. And when those waves of immigration were coming in, largely from the British Isles, you had inflows from places like Scotland, Northern England, well into the 1960s and 70s, and you had, in fact, even a bump of leftists moving for Canada under Thatcher. But right now, immigration means the Middle East, Asia, South and East, Africa, the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, large numbers, especially now with the war in Ukraine. None of these countries, none of these newcomers necessarily have much of ancestral connection to the House of Gotha/Windsor. But there is a sense of to arrive. Most Canadian immigrants are either pursuing a better life or escaping something bad. And the cute particularities of Canada, like this vestigial monarchy, are generally considered to be, harmless local peculiarities that you can safely celebrate because they don't mean anything, and the older Anglos here seem to appreciate it. However, a lot of that was predicated on the personal quality of Elizabeth II. She had gone through World War II without leaving England. There had been proposals for the royal family to evacuate to Canada for their safety, but they stayed, they toughed it out. That meant a lot to British people and to the Commonwealth. It felt like a moment where, despite her status as a royal, she was going through a shared experience with her people. At this point, I can't think of anything that Charles has ever done which would count as a shared experience with the people of any kind. So that's a weird poll. I don't have a dog.
For those listening to the show, someone put in the chat, because there's a loud dog barking, which is not Kuba's, it's Jean Bajlan's.
It's my dog.
Mm-hmm. And they said, is Kuba's dog racist? Vote.
My dog's probably a racist voter.
No, your dog is just standing up for His Majesty's honor, right?
I didn't think Kuba was going to stop me.
I mean, with a lot of this monarchy stuff, the monarchy was reinvented in the late 19th century in Britain. The monarchy was not particularly popular in the mid 19th century during the early phases of the Industrial Revolution. But we see after the 1870s, like, there's a real attempt. Victoria was, after the death of her husband, was kind of in hiding. People were like, what's the point of this monarchy in this modern country? There were movements like the Charterists who, played an important role. But in the 1870s, there was a conservative turn around the world in politics, and the monarchy was reinvented as this huge, as this major institution and rallying point for the nation. And this is a kind of echo of that type of monarchy, that was envisaged in the late 19th century. A monarchy, which is like a celebrity monarchy, but as people learn more and more about the monarchy, as the monarchy opens up, it becomes like not only the political stuff, which is like deeply problematic, the fact that there were Nazi sympathizers in the monarchy, that a lot of problematic things in the monarchy with certain individuals, like more recently Prince Andrew and his sex crime things, all this kind of stuff. As we've learned about all this, the monarchy's mystique has kind of declined, and I think there's a lot more skepticism now, especially as this new generation, people grew up in the 80s and 90s with all this tabloid stuff about them, the stories about Charles wanting to be reincarnated as a tampon inside Camilla Parker Bowles, the fact that you had this weird arranged marriage between Lady Diana and Charles, how it didn't work out, all this kind of celebrity scandal, and
how they ritually sacrificed Diana in order to harvest her blood for the lizard people.
Whoa.
Well, it's I think more than anything, it's just as the monarchy is being exposed, it just comes off as a weird institution with weird people who have weird, who are not necessarily evil. They're just like strange, odd people with enormous amounts of privilege, who have lots of money, lots of social capital and power.
They don't even seem that happy.
And they don't even seem that happy. They're always miserable and fighting. And this whole thing just, it's not even enjoyable as spectacle. It's just sad. It's just like it's an embarrassment. If anything will get rid of monarchy in Britain, it's not like some grand Republican political principle. It's just that the monarchy will just become an embarrassment. Charles will try to do what he can do to do this, but we're in a new era. When the Queen came to power, Britain was still like a major empire, right? Mm-hmm. There was large parts of Africa were still under British colonial rule. The story has been a massive geopolitical turnaround, and the monarchy just seems a very out of touch institution. And
although I point out that I was watching The Mandalorian yesterday.
Yeah, it's a good show.
There are so many monarchs in Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And with Bridgerton, it's an extraordinarily popular series in the UK, mm-hmm. and it has managed to try to revive mystique around the aristocracy, largely by fusing it with wokeness, because their whole the whole gimmick, as far as I can tell, is British palace intrigue, but black people.
Yeah, I think there is definitely this tendency. There is a certain tendency in liberalism, which has an imagination that romanticizes, this very hierarchical societies from the past, and creates cultural products like Bridgerton that diversify things. And we see this with things like in America, you have the Hamilton, which you have this diverse cast playing the roles of white people. We have this whole big scandal about a black woman being used to portray Cleopatra, when Cleopatra was a Berber Greek inbred.
Berber Greek.
Tawny at most.
I love that, dude.
But the
soundboard drop.
But what it kind of indicates, I find, the problematic nature of it is not that they're casting people of color in these positions, like people going mad about the black woman as Cleopatra. Well, they had like white women playing Cleopatra in the past as well, like Elizabeth Taylor. Was it Elizabeth Taylor?
Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a point of contention for a lot of people.
I mean, they had Genghis Khan playing. They had John Wayne playing Genghis Khan.
Exactly. So that's not the issue with it. What the issue seems to me, is that by doing these like diverse historical / fantasy things, you're obfuscating the history and creating a false image of the past. And at the same time, ironically, you're erasing the role that people of color actually did play during this time, right? Black people didn't turn up in Britain in the 1950s. There have been black people in Britain all the way back to, like Roman times, right? So there's a kind of glorification of this hierarchical society with its beautiful clothes, with its beautiful things, and now with its beautiful diverse people, which is a perfect metaphor for the kind of hierarchical society that progressive liberalism envisages, one where the hierarchies remain the same, except the elite is beautiful and diverse, which allows a kind of thing. Yeah, go ahead.
There's a reassurance. There's a role for this types of cultural output to reassure both anxious minority members of the elite that they have a place at the top, that they're secure, as well as conventionally white, let's say, members of the elite, that they're good people because they're inclusive. But you completely erase the class domination aspect in favor of this celebration of refinement and excellence, right? They pretend that it's about class, but it's really about caste.
Yeah. So, you can filter this through the discussion, the discourse around Meghan Markle and the monarchy, because it's a clash of two worlds. One is like a deeply conservative and implicitly racialized notion of monarchy. I mean, David Starkey, who is like a popular historian in Britain, went on a news channel and complained that the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, wasn't truly able to understand the significance of this coronation because he's not truly part of our culture. There is a perception of the monarchy as this kind of institution, but like Peter Tatchell, for example, who is a well-known gay rights activist in Britain, who's been on the political scene for ages, his critique of monarchy was like the next 3 generations, 100 years of British heads of state is going to be cis white men, as if the problem is the color of the king. I mean, if something happens, right, and Charles and William and baby George and all those ones, they all get wiped out, you could have Meghan Markle and Harry's kid become king. Would that make the institution of monarchy any better? I mean,
it would,
yes.
because they would Prince Archie, it's an Archie, right? Would abuse his power. It would be full on Joffrey style. The monarchy would be based again, right? They would take back Calais from those dirty frogs. It would just be so kind of awesome, and it's thanks to the melanin.
It'd be like Wakanda.
Yes. Well,
that Wakanda is
like
another
a
example.
Dothraki Wakanda.
And every day is like the Wiz in Wakanda.
Wakanda is like another deeply problematic idea. Not only because it has all this kind of racist undertones. It's like, oh, they've got like super technology, but they're going to be going around in loincloths and fighting with spears.
Yeah, that whole thing is.
It's really like deeply problematic and like essentializes African culture in a kind of in a way that is kind of definitely problematic. And also it celebrates this state as an absolute monarchy where power is held by these hereditary tribal leaders. So there's all this glorification of the aristocracy. I mean, even if you think about this whole superhero genres, you have this kind of aristocracy of people. So there's so many aspects of quote unquote liberal culture which have this profoundly conservative undertone, which are laundered through a kind of superficial ahistoric diversity, which paradoxically, especially in the context of historical dramas that do this, erases the actual role and position of people of color who lived at the time and who were like active in politics. Hamilton, they made everybody, they had this diverse cast, but what about all the other people in this society? I realize that's not the story they might want to tell, but what about telling the story of some of the black political leaders of the revolution. Perhaps that would be more, an interesting way to celebrate the American Revolution. But instead, we have this very hierarchical, superficial celebration of aristocracy, which I find perverse.
It's like a fantasy version of the West Wing, and that's because as much as the sort of race swapping creates the impression of some type of justice or representation,
reparations.
The part of the function of this culture is to reassure those that can transpose themselves back into that historical period as the leadership class, that there is something excellent about them, that they are the anointed of history. And, you don't get, there's a reason why Hamilton, the real fanatics are PMC types, especially in a lot of creative industries, NGOs, that kind of thing, because that's how they see themselves, right? They can imagine, once you get past the whole anti-woke, right? Like the whole odious social injustice of that time period. Yeah, I would be hanging out with Thomas Jefferson. It would be awesome.
Well, speaking of hanging out with slave owners, let's move on to the next news story, which is probably going to be a little more heated. It's been all over the news, and I'm sure people have seen the snuff film.
Great.
I've seen much moralistic language in the recent public murder of Jordan Neely. Much like George Floyd, Healy's public death causes many to come out and give angelic eulogies and protests. As we've said countless times on this show, there is a failure of institutions in this country, and the feeling is palpable. It just doesn't mean you don't trust the government. It means your feelings centered around what justice looks like are seen through a corrupted lens. No one can keep you safe because your property isn't safe. Defunding or abolishing inept or corrupt law enforcement becomes almost a moot point for many. I'm reading and literally hearing when I do go across the imaginary line, people complain about, quote, criminals back on the streets. It's like the 90s all over again. But that being said, how many people have had their car or home broken into and felt physically violated? None of this is to say that these feelings of many people should be viewed as condescending and simply ignored. But acknowledging a rise in property crime isn't a call for Charles Bronson-esque vigilante violence. This impulse is expected because I feel as a society, we've internalized underclass ideology. Jordan Neely wasn't the only homeless person in crisis to be murdered by a civilian who felt, quote, threatened. Just a few weeks ago in San Francisco, Banco Brown, which many probably don't know, was murdered after being accused of shoplifting in a Walgreens by a security guard. There are armed security guards at Walgreens in San Francisco. Unlike in SF, where there still is pressure for the man that killed Jordan Neely to face manslaughter charges, the armed security guard that shot and killed Banco Brown is not going to be charged by the DA in SF, Brooke Jenkins. I haven't seen this case get the same attention, and I wonder why that is. Unlike the Jordan Neely case, everyone involved is black. The security guard, the victim, a black trans man, and the DA, all black. Could some of our narratives around this be extremely reductionist? Here's an excerpt from the SF Standard, a local paper. It's a lot to deal with, a lot of pressure. A person can only take so much. That's a quote from the security guard that shot Banco Brown. When you are limited to certain options, something will happen, unquote. On Monday, Anthony was released from jail. Brown's family and friends condemned his killing. They said the death of Brown, who was Black and transgender, was a failure on the part of city leaders to keep members of those communities safe. They have called for Anthony, a Black man, to face charges. Board of Supervisors President Aaron Peskin planned to ask his colleagues to pass a resolution urging Jenkins to reconsider filing charges, saying that he believed the case could be tried at least as manslaughter, if not murder. Brown was a volunteer organizer at a nonprofit called the Young Women's Freedom Center, which advocates for transgender youth and young women. Julia Arroyo, the co-executive director of the center, described Brown as a generous person who put the needs of others over his own. At Tuesday's Board of Supervisors meeting, Arroyo said Brown was not a dangerous or aggressive person. He worked and went to school, but still struggled to make ends meet and live in San Francisco, she said. Quote, his last week of life, he said, I'm tired. I'm sleeping outside. I'm tired. I'm not myself right now, Arroyo said. And he still brought people into the center. Sheen, you want to mute your mic real quick? The torture is going on in the background. Prominent Bay Area civil rights attorney John Burris said Brown's family has hired him to represent them and potentially file a lawsuit over the killing. Burris said the shooting appeared to be wrongful and unlawful because Brown was unarmed and was not threatening. Quote, we are working to try to get as much information as we can, unquote, Burris said. It is not clear whether the family would seek to sue Walgreens or the security firm that employed Anthony, or both. Anthony said guard work can be a lonely occupation. From Anthony, who has my back? Nobody. You are left with no support. It's a frightening feeling with a lot of people around you who could potentially harm you, he added. We often discuss housing on this show on local levels because when you talk about homelessness, it's only really addressed at the state and municipal level. The Fed isn't doing large sweeping bills to even attempt to curb this issue. When we see initiatives to build more housing, even market rate won't house all the people that are in need of shelter. Also in San Francisco, there's a plan to build 70 tiny homes. Some of the homeless, to house some of the homeless residents in the Mission area. There are obstacles to even this build out. First and foremost, the residents aren't too thrilled about it, and they want to make sure the site doesn't become a dumping ground. From the Chronicle, a plan to open the site remains uncertain as the neighborhood supervisor is withholding her support until the city improves conditions around an existing shelter at 1515 South Van Ness Avenue. The new proposal faces other hurdles, including an eye-popping $100,000 per cabin price, 10 times higher than similar homes built in Oakland. But Supervisor Hillary Ronan's main concern right now is not cost. Conditions around the South Van Ness shelter have frustrated Ronan so much that she says she won't back the tiny cabins unless the city can keep the blocks around the existing site free of tents, loitering, graffiti, and trash, at least for a few weeks. She blames Mayor London Breed's homeless and other departments for the situation and argued that it's unfair to open a second site until the city proves that these sites improve street conditions. Ronan pushed to fund the tiny homes last year, but after neighbors and families at a school next to the proposed site pushed back in February, the supervisor said she needed assurances from the city that the new site wouldn't make conditions in the neighborhood worse. The supervisor said she's opened homeless services in the district despite resistance from neighbors, but became fed up as conditions, in her view, and that of some of the vocal neighbors, devolved around the site. I can't keep promising my constituents that I'm going to make the neighborhood better by bringing more services into the neighborhood if that isn't true, Ronan said. We have to make that commitment to neighborhoods. If we cannot deliver on that commitment, then the whole system is at risk. The ultimatum leaves in limbo the plan to open the tiny homes in a city where thousands sleep on the street every year. The conflict is playing out amid intensifying battles in the city over unsheltered homelessness, with some fed-up residents pushing to improve street conditions while also resisting proposals to house or shelter people next to their homes and businesses. Advocates argue that street conditions won't improve until the city opens up more shelters and permanent housing. The homeless department doesn't know if the site will open without Ronin support, but it said it's still looking for vendors to build it and run it. Both of these murders of these young people do not happen in a vacuum, and we cannot overly moralize it. We have a problem right now with housing anyone in this country, and it is nowhere more evident than my home state, California, where even in downtown Los Angeles, a plan to build not affordable housing, just housing in the garment district is being held up as people in the garment district are saying, if you build these houses, we may lose 20,000 jobs. And that was only to house, that was to build 100,000 units and only house a fifth of the population looking for housing.
Well, I think there's a couple of different points here, Jason, and you're more familiar with this topic than I am. And but when we talk about homelessness, we're talking about a constellation of different phenomena because there's different types of homelessness. People living in their cars, that's a huge number of people that you don't see necessarily on the street because they're parked up and ashamed and keeping themselves to themselves and often working jobs without anywhere to live. And then you have people on the street, and then you have a lot of people with maybe with substance abuse issues or mental health issues who end up on the street because there's no proper safety net to deal with them. Now, obviously, creating housing is part of a solution to a housing problem. That's seems like very evident, but there seems to be the people who end up getting hurt are often people who have health issues, and they need some kind of intervention. But for a quality kind of intervention, that's a lot of money because it's not just a matter of hiring a social worker. If you hire a social worker, like a 21-year-old person with no experience working for like $25,000 a year, that you're not going to get a high quality service. There needs to be there needs to be a way, for example, to be able to confine people who are, danger not just to the other people, but to themselves primarily. I mean, this when you read about this issue in New York, I'm not completely unsympathetic with the idea there's a racial aspect to this. People feel, there's this whole culture which often portrays Black people as being more intimidating or more dangerous than white people, and there is definitely a racial aspect to all this, but that seems a secondary order issue to the fact that homeless people are just and people with mental health issues are just left in extremely dangerous conditions where you might end up with somebody doing something to them that leads to their death, as we had in the case of this guy. It may have some racial motivation, but as in the case you mentioned in California, it may not have a racial dimension to it. It's because we dehumanize so much of these homeless people because it's easy to feel sorry for people who seem quote unquote innocent, but sometimes these people can be quite difficult, right? And people don't like to face that reality that it's not just about housing. A lot of these people need help, and because we don't have a functioning mental health system or even health system in general, they're just left into these situations where a member of public may be viciously and with malice murdering them, or may legitimately think that they're defending themselves against a legitimate potential threat. It's not just a middle class or bourgeois concern to be concerned with your security. A lot of people in poor neighborhoods, their number one complaint about the police is not that there are police, but that the police aren't dealing with the people who need
they're
dealing.
enough. It's a rehash of things that I saw where I'm from in the 90s, where even Public Enemy had a number one rap song. Tucson, you remember 911 as a joke?
One of my favorites.
That's one of the main scenes in the movie Boys in the Hood, to kind of set the tone for what's going on in this area, that it is a lawless hellscape of crime when Larry Fishburne's character shoots a would-be burglar or shoots at a would-be burglar. And then there's that interaction with law enforcement. I think that's an important point to make, because oftentimes I think there's an oversimplistic moralization of certain issues that people face on a daily basis. And when you face certain things on a daily basis, and you already have kind of an internalized idea of what poor people are, right? Like, I'm poor, but I'm not on social services like that person, or I'm poor, but I haven't gone that far down the rabbit hole. Ergo, I'm a better person. And you can really otherize them and have no problem seeing them get locked up or beat up on a public transportation. And I do think there's a lot of factors that go into what we saw happen in New York. And there is some differences of what we saw happen in New York and in California. I think in New York, cameras make a huge difference on the way people act. I mean, most altercations that you see them on camera. Everybody takes out their phone. People got to act a different way when there's cameras there. It's like going to the gym. You might do an extra rep at the gym that you're not going to do at home, because nobody.
So you're saying that, like with the cameras, people are kind of
Yes.
forced into performing and
Yes.
not wanting to lose face even more.
Yes. Also, what a great move. It's a bigger man against a much smaller person that you knew you had the upper hand on. If you're in New York, you're going to see that situation play out 15 times before you hit a corner with somebody yelling insane things at someone else. So there's some factors there that probably we don't want to admit, because we're all guilty of some of these things.
I also think that a lot has to do with the fact that in especially San Francisco, there's such an emphasis on having everything delivered, relating to people through an app, through technology. You don't know your neighbors. You don't. The idea of community is absolutely abstracted away from the set of people that live close to you. And one step that could very easily be taken to get more support for these tiny houses would be to involve the neighbors in selecting who moves in, right? You might actually meet them. You might actually, learn their story. And in that way, neighbors would become part of the social fabric that supports transition off the streets. But they're not going to do that, because the cultural lifestyle, right, the cultural norms, the habits of living are all pushed towards not just a dehumanization of thought, but like you actually don't meet anybody even once they're in housing. You don't know any homeless person's name. You don't. The transition from living on the streets or being unhoused into, say, one of these tiny houses is more kind of transition towards institutionalization, where it's like, okay, you have your place now, just don't leave it, don't startle the good people, the taxpayers. While what it would really take to improve conditions, as the councilman says she wants, would be incorporating the new residents into the life of the neighborhood. But that would also require the neighborhood to have a life.
Toussaint, do you have something to add?
I don't know. These are tough stories to hear. There are no. Whoa, you made me. It's just a jacket
Keep
with
going.
a boot.
Yep.
Okay. Well, yes, these are tough stories to hear. There are no easy answers. As a person who lives in New York City, who is around homeless people quite often. Um, I don't know. It's difficult. I've got everything personally encouraging me to dehumanize the homeless people around me. The landlord sends out notices. Don't feed them like they're pigeons or something.
Jesus.
Yeah, don't let them in the building if they want to get bottles and stuff. Don't do anything like that. Don't encourage them to be around us, which is like they don't really need encouragement. And they are our neighbors,
Mhm.
whether we like it or not.
I mean, these people are often just trying to survive. Like they shut people,
Exactly.
they shut people out. For example, at the building my brother lives in Hull, there's like a heating. There's a section where all the heat from the heating in the building goes, and obviously they put all kinds of security on that because homeless people in the freezing cold were going in there and sleeping because they would get really ill if they stayed out on the street and it's like
Hmm.
-1 or -2. So people don't homeless people are often an inconvenience to people, like a real inconvenience, not like they're just angry with them for no reason, right? When
Right.
someone's yelling at people at the tube station, it can be intimidating. I might not be intimidated, but imagine you're a young woman and there's somebody shouting like crazy in the
Mhm.
tube and you're alone on the platform and you don't know if that's just someone who's harmless or someone who could be dangerous, people behaving all kinds of unpredictable ways.
Mm.
And so people, it's not just a middle class concern to be concerned with the quality of life in your neighborhood. uh, the the issue, it's not just that people are frustrated at homeless people for the sake of being frustrated at homeless people because they just can't stand them. It's because this is a deep like symptom of crisis in the society and this urban decay, and unless there's a holistic approach, it can't really be solved simply through like stopgap measures like emergency shelter or needle exchanges. You need like a long-term investment that requires money, people, manpower, has to help people get out of these like very difficult situations where that there can be help for people who need to be confined for their
There,
own good.
I mean, there's also another element here, which is the concentration of jobs, services, opportunities, economic life in a small number of cities. One, the consultant reptile part of my brain is very much bothered by the fact that you have homelessness in San Francisco, but vast swaths of abandoned housing
Mhm.
all across the Rust Belt. Now, it would be a bit of an administrative lift to move people around from where there's an excess of people to where there's an excess of space. But it's exactly the sort of thing that government is supposed to do. And the granted, it's disruptive, but any kind of solution is going to be disruptive for somebody. And getting
Mhm.
um, homeless people away from cities, which are now becoming more and more hostile to them as a group, to places where um, you have enough room so that you're not going to bump up against that type of reaction immediately. It also wages are and costs are lower in those
Well,
areas, so
there's another
a
point.
budget for social services can go much further.
I mean,
But
that's an important point, Cooper, because I think when we deploy our resources as a society, whether we believe we have to do that through the state or through civil society, um, you know, uh, there needs to be this big investment, for example, that can create jobs instead of creating jobs for the military industrial complex to kill people. Create these green jobs that are well paid, in which people can look after members of a society who are in like dire straits. This more nurses, more people who can assist with, drug rehabilitation. Have this as a big national project to invest in helping people, which creates opportunities and jobs where people in these societies can participate in helping people to you know reintegrate in society, have a place in society, and get the medical help they need if they need medical help, to help people get back on their feet. This could be an opportunity to mobilize society towards something, but we
A New
don't.
Deal style,
A
right?
New Deal
There
style.
are precedents in America's own history for
Mhm.
that kind of large scale labor mobilization.
But we looked at homelessness differently. This is just my opinion. You guys can disagree with me, as I am talking to two historians. The view of homelessness was less individual failings. We called encampments, what we would now call encampments, Hoovervilles.
Mhm.
And so these failures of society were failures of federal government. And they will forever be the failures of one of the more generous, inverted quotes, president we've had in Herbert Hoover, who was known for his philanthropic zeal. So you know we see these degenerations of society collectively as moral failings, and we can get mad when these failings come home in death, right? When there's a murder that happens, a police George Floyd situation, now this young man Jordan Neely, we can get mad collectively, but that anger almost feels somewhat cathartic, because it's never really about what made Jordan Neely in the first place. George Floyd existed for 40 some years in precarity for most of those years, and nobody gave a shit. And to valorize these people in death, for me, is a little upsetting. Maybe because I had to deal or live amongst, and maybe was one of, these forgotten souls that just couldn't get right.
And even if they aren't perfect people, it doesn't mean they deserve to get murdered on the street, right? You don't have to be like the greatest person of all time to like expect not to be murdered for being yelling on the
Mhm.
street. When you
It's it's actually, I mean, there's a two, I can see two sides, and let me explain what I mean, because I'm not being very articulate right now. But um, yes, certainly, like the tragedy there is not that a wonderful living saint was killed, but that a human life was ended. It
Mhm.
shouldn't matter, the details, right? Right. It's kind of like means testing the value of your life,
Mhm.
right? Like if you have enough bad marks against you, then oh yeah, okay, like you choked somebody to death, but like he was kind of a dick, so
Mhm.
we'll give you a ticket, right?
Mhm.
Oh, you choked somebody to death, but it was Caitlyn Jenner, so you're going to be hung, drawn, and quartered.
Mhm.
Um, and similarly, the people who are riding the train potentially, or experience um, insecurity and harassment on a day-to-day basis, they constantly feel like their basic, right? Like you shouldn't have to be a rich person or a great person or a living saint to feel
Mhm.
secure in your own neighborhood.
Mhm.
Is that too much to ask?
Mhm.
Right? Like everybody wants that. Let's not pretend that we don't. Um, and so people reach a breaking point where it's no longer just the practical question of am I secure, but it begins to feel like a dehumanization of themselves, that nobody is looking after their neighborhood, nobody's paying attention to what should be a basic level of livability that citizens can enjoy.
And I think we have to start acknowledging people's frustration, and that's why I wanted to, I wrote that thing out about, we have to acknowledge the fact that we are attached to our things, our cars, our apartments, our homes, and when those things get violated, we tend to get very angry. And
Well,
justice.
if you get your car stolen or burned or destroyed, and your job depends on you being able to drive, and you don't have money to get some kind of replacement, then you can be in a cascade of personal disaster that leads you to homelessness. People are in such precarity, like they need the things that they have. It's not like, everybody has a giggle when somebody like messes up a Ferrari, but often, like this could be some kind of just joyriding someone's like bashed up old Lincoln, which they used to get to their job because like there's no freaking public transport that they can use. Like people are frustrated. I think
I counted Gene. I remember once we were walking to the Target when I lived on Wood Street, and I counted 3 people living in Lexus SUVs.
Mm-hmm.
Living in Lexus SUVs.
And that's another factor that people don't think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you get to real Jeffrey Epstein money, you're not actually safe. It's possible to go from upper middle class, luxury Lexus SUV PMC right to the bottom.
Yep.
There's the economy is fragile enough, and there are points of failure that mean it takes a lot more wealth than people realize to ensure individual security without a social safety net.
Oh goodness. I believe Bertram Cooper calls that fuck you money. He says, how many people make fuck you money? Like, I'm not worried about this. I'm never gonna. I mean, how many athletes do we hear about that become homeless after they sign
Yeah, I mean, there was all this scandal with the way that the college football is administered and some of the fates that people have. I mean, it's a very harsh society that you can win big, you could get better money, you can get better money than you'll get in other countries, but there is an enormous downside, which is for many people, they're only a few bad luck away from losing the access to like critical resources for them to sustain themselves and to sustain their family. And like you say, in recent years, often this homelessness writ large as a question has been portrayed as this, like, it's people, drug addicts and things like that. Those are the kind of ones that we see, but they're a tip of a bigger iceberg of people who hiding their homelessness or just are quiet in the encampments trying to keep themselves to themselves, because we have this huge social crisis which needs to be dealt with in a holistic way. The people who need the help need to be able to get it, and there needs to be a path for people to get back on the ladder after falling off it without this social safety net. And in other countries, the countervailing force is that you have like a functioning informal social networks in which, like, you become homeless, you'll go stay with a relative. But we also have this atomized society where people don't look after each other through traditional networks, and we haven't constructed a culture of civil society solidarity that can deal with this issue as well. So we're in a really difficult situation.
And I also think that we really need to call out the cults and weird religious movements and like criminal predators, because they aren't stepping up to fill the gap, right? That they're the last line of defense to really take people in and convert them either into willing drones or meat commodities.
What was that cult in Oregon in the 80s that brought the buses all
the
over
River
the country.
Wild,
The River
the Wild Country, the
Yeah.
wild country.
Where they got all the homeless people from all over, and they said, "Hey, if you come to Oregon and register,
Exactly,
as a
we'll
citizen,
take you in.
we'll take you in."
Yeah, and precisely, like, where are my good cults at?
They don't exist. You know, it's all a money game.
Can I say something?
No.
Thank you. So we have a comment from Kushlik that says, but yeah, focusing on the narrow situation of NYC, it's not good right now, or at least that is the broad feeling amongst people. There is some amount of fear. And I would have to say that some of the fear is like PTSD from years ago. People are afraid of it turning into 1988 again. And when they start seeing little signs here and there, they get very afraid that we're going back to where we were, which is not necessarily the case. Where you were is not necessarily where you're going to go, but that is part of the fear. It's not just, oh, I just saw this on the news, now I'm afraid. It's also the experience of living in the city through bad times.
That's a really good point. And I think, again, we don't. I don't want to overly belittle, because that happens where people say, "Well, I'm concerned," because if you're living something every day, if this is your daily occurrence and it's not a one-time thing, you're going to be a little gun shy. You're gonna. I'm horrible because I got shot at a few times as a young person. I really don't like when people get behind me, and I've been known to hit people on accident when they get behind me.
And you scream when you see rats.
I do scream when I see rats. Sneaky bastards. Sneaky bastards. But you know, we sometimes don't take people's fears seriously. And I think when we talk about rising numbers in crime, that's why I made it a point to say property crime, because that's really what we're seeing. And a lot of people do view property crime as a personal invasion.
Well, if somebody breaks into a space that you consider to be secure, they disrespect that space. And you don't know what they would have done if you were in it at the time, right? That is triggering for a lot of people, right? If somebody's willing to break in, then what if I tried to stop them?
I mean, this is going to be the problem, is, you know, the hardline criminal justice system, you know, doesn't work, right? It's, I mean, but for people who suffer from crime, the arbitrary use of state power to punish the bad guys might be cathartic, right? And that's the danger that we might see with the growth of more conservative trends amongst you know, poor and working class people, is that they will feel like the discourse is totally alienated from them, and they'll want like a kind of vengeance kind of law system that takes it out on the bad guys. And yes, there's like a middle class, quote unquote, petty bourgeois element to that, but there's, you know, a legitimate basis for many poor and working class people to want to feel safe in their neighborhoods. And
but can we agree on this before we go? Does it feel like to you this it's all about justice? It's the Charles Bronson feeling of justice. And that doesn't stop with people choking out homeless people. It's the same feeling of, to me, punching someone that says something you don't like.
Yeah.
I see a swastika band on your arm, I'm going to punch you because you're a Nazi. It's like, I don't give a shit what that. What your oil changers has to say about me.
I think that the framework of justice is one which prevents us from just being practical about problem solving, right? Like again, it's my lizard consultant reptile brain, but these things needn't be elevated to philosophy when there are fixes that involve some buses, some money, and a few people who are dedicated to seeing something through to completion. And that nobody is doing that, but instead reaching for extreme solutions. And the policy conversation is around either fantasies or incarceration, right? Either repression or utopia.
I mean, let's ask the question, Kuba. I mean, in San Francisco, there's a bunch of empty buildings now. Nordstrom has left the building. Nordstrom's gone. You lived in San Francisco for a while. I'm sure you went to that Westfield Mall in downtown at the Powell Street BART, and you know that 6-story Nordstrom. It's leaving. There is space. We don't have to ship people off to, the hinterlands of America. There's space right here in California, Los Angeles as well. But who do you think these municipalities would rather have in their city?
Sure.
Nordstrom, big retail chains, or
an industrial sized homeless shelter.
Or an industrial sized homeless shelter, which always ends up being, sadly, because of what we're talking about right now, a little hell zone. And we have to start looking at these things more humanely. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
And this is even within the logic of neoliberalism. What you could do is sell that property to Twitter or give them a lease. The economic value of a footprint like that in San Francisco is enormous. But they have to build housing in Fresno or someplace where, you're actually going to have to, you can have this. And that way we don't have to deal with the homeless people. But it's such a giveaway that you're also going to have to solve our problem for us. And then you have the brilliance of the private sector put to work. But nobody even looks at those kinds of things. Instead, it's repression, denial, and then progressive rage response is the cycle that we're caught in.
And you end up with Eric Adams.
America's mayor.
That's a great way to end the show. I think that's what it is. I will say this, as we're going to end on that beautiful note by me and Jean Bajlan. Thank you guys for all watching. Jean, Kuba, and of course, my sister in arms, M. Toussaint. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is an intense show. I'm sure you guys have a lot of feelings about it. Let us know in the comments. I would love to know what you guys have to say. I believe in the show, definitely in the show comments, there should be links to several of the news articles that we're discussing. My brief synopsis of Brax Brown and Jordan Neely, and also the situations that are happening in the Bay Area, kind of paint a bigger picture for you on how housing works. I believe there should be an article in there too about the Oakland teacher strike. Yes, the teachers in Oakland are on strike again, not just for an increase in salaries, but they are also asking for some quality of life changes, housing for all the students, drought resistant shrubbery. There's several asks that they have, so definitely check that out, because it's all kind of works together in this larger tale that we're trying to tell. It's not as simple as, person kills person on New York City subway. These are much, much deeper problems, and we're trying to put as much context around them as possible. So thank you to everybody watching. Thank you to all my brothers that helped me out with getting this show done and make this happen. We will be back Tuesday to discuss Jean Bajlan's big article in Compact Magazine. I mean, that was a fancy article. It's behind a paywall.
It's behind a paywall.
You know, it was the centerpiece of the magazine, wasn't it?
There's
For the day.
there's a dress code if you want to read it.
we all put a tie on to read it.
Well, they were very nice to me at Compact. They didn't edit me out of existence, which I appreciated, and gave me a platform. You know, so I guess I'm a fascist now because I published with Compact. But if I am, Ben Burgess is also a fascist, so I'm fine.
Yeah, he's kind of fashy.
He is kind of
He's
fashy.
kind of fashy.
Ben Duce.
He fashed at me the other day.
Ben
I don't want to
Duce.
know what that. I don't know what fashing at you means. I don't know what it's code for. But, I'll leave that between you two.
Well, thank you guys, and we are
Out.
Cartoons. We are cartoons.
Damn it. Just because I fucked up, I'll do cartoons.
Thank you.